purpose of today's presentation is to review and critique the strategic management plan submitted by myself a couple of years ago as part of my MBA course. The organisation in question was South Australia's Environment Protection Authority, which is established under the Environment Protection Act of 1993 to promote the principles of ecologically sustainable development. This is relatively straightforward if a standard applies for the amount of pollutant that's permitted in air or water, but becomes more problematic in other circumstances. In these circumstances, the general environmental duty applies. What this means is that any activity you or I undertake, we have to take all reasonable and practical measures to minimize the impact of our activity on the environment. That assessment of what's reasonable and practical can become dicey and cause concern. Section 7 of the Act also means that the EPA does not have authority over every activity that goes on in the state. Certain mines and quarries, etc., are exempt from the Act. On a day-to-day basis, the Environment Protection Authority assesses what's reasonable and practicable, takes a look at what colleagues are doing around the world and sets standards. It also works with existing licensees to establish new license conditions and enable them to come into compliance with the new standard, as well as working with new licensees on how to set themselves up to meet the standard. The EPA monitors compliance against both license conditions and the standards and takes enforcement action where necessary. A key part of the role of the EPA is to inform the public of any risk and also to listen to the public about their perception of risk. From a business perspective, however, the EPA is a monopoly funded by one customer, the state government. In addition to the activities that it takes under the Act, the additional services it offers are to raise state revenue through licensing fees and waste disposal fees, and to protect ministers when the community is outraged. In coming up with a strategic management plan, key considerations were given to macro environmental analysis such as PESTEL, where, as shown in orange here, the main things that popped out were the federal government's move to green tape reduction, the state's revenue pressure that the government was feeling, which had led to it announcing that it was going to disband Zero Waste South Australia in 2015, the expectation of the community regarding transparency and accountability and the commitment the state had made to that, this ongoing trend that big data is going to become available and that we will have automatic methods of gathering and analysing that and presenting the results, and also Australia's record with regard to greenhouse gases and climate change. Looking at Porter's 5 forces, the key issue there is clearly biopower. Given that the EPA has one funding source, which is the state government, and that the state government is undergoing revenue pressure, this is a key area of concern at the time. Other things of interest is the fact that there is the potential for substitution. University researchers have the potential and the ability to undertake some of the work that's undertaken by personnel within the EPA. And from a supplier power perspective, there is a lot of call and a lot of demand for support from the EPA from that perspective. Putting those two together and looking at opportunities and threats, it was identified that the key success factors for where the market was anticipated to be going were that the EPA had to be recognised as the environmental regulator. It had to demonstrate that it was financially astute. It had to have and maintain the technical and regulatory expertise to set the standards and ensure that operators were meeting them. It also had to be innovative and adaptable, looking at aspects such as big data and how to automatically monitor in real time and present results in a meaningful way to the public. It had to be influential. It had to be able to influence beyond, it had to be able to influence aspects such as mining, etc., which are currently exempt under the Act. And from a capability perspective, the EPA had some weaknesses with regard to these key success factors. And all of this was put together to develop a strategic management plan for where the EPA needed to go moving forward. The plan itself, three of the objectives are illustrated here. The first one was that the EPA could consider taking its current capability and services to new markets, with Zero Waste South Australia shutting down and the federal environmental regulator having its role reduced. There was the possibility that the state EPA could pick it up and take some of that. That would be fairly incremental. It's not a particularly compelling or exciting initiative, but it's a way that we could potentially raise revenue. Another one would be to work in focusing on the influencing. Another one that we could do is to coordinate and ensure environmental improvement with other state government departments, where we currently have very limited coordination, and they tend to regulate under their act with little involvement of us. And the more compelling one, which was certainly a stretch for us, is there's a trend to actually develop econometrics that measure the harm that's caused by environmental activity. And then as a company improves, it can actually measure the financial benefit of what it's done from an environmental perspective. The plan itself also added a new strategy. The strategy of the EPA was less words than what is shown in the grey box here. The strategy that I proposed was to continue to exist as a standalone organisation, resourced to influence and regulate human activities to protect, enhance and restore the environment. This is obviously a fairly weak strategy. It fails to really focus on what the market is and what the differentiation is, and how we add value. So in hindsight, that wasn't a very good one. Looking at it with regard to different measures, you can see that from a financial perspective, all three of those projects had a positive impact, either from raising revenue or from making it clear what the financial benefit was of addressing environmental pollutants. From a customer perspective, the Prospector, Defender and Reactor framework is unique to the public sector. It's not used very much by companies, but in the public regulatory environment, that's a different framework, and fairly positive results there because it was focusing on Prospector and Defender rather than Reactor. And from an internal process perspective, most of this was fairly routine. We could find a way to actually embed those within work that we were already doing or broaden the work that we were already doing. And the econometrics was a big learning curve for us. So with hindsight, what are the new insights? So this was a process-heavy assignment where we combined PESTLE, the 5 forces, to identify opportunities and threats, and then filter through that to identify the key success factors for the market moving forward. We look at organizational structure, do an organograph to look at the informal structure that exists within and without the organization, and identify the strengths and weaknesses. And then that gives us our internal capabilities. Combining the success factors and the capabilities, we can identify gaps with regard to what the market needs and what the organization can offer, and then develop our strategic objectives to meet the market need and the implementation plan to ensure capability. And then we can assess them using Kaplan and Norton's balanced scorecard. We can assess it using a framework that applies to the particular sector, and we can assess it using the 5Q model. However, having now attended the decision course and decision making and analysis, a lot of this work is heuristics and bias. It only has in it what I know. There was no consultation, which means there are likely to be large barriers to adoption of this. There's no scenario analysis or quantification of financial impact, and there's no estimate of risk or utility. From a strategy perspective, the strategy that was developed, it's not long-term. It doesn't provide a clear direction. The strategy fails to indicate what the market is and the unique value that's offered by the Environment Protection Authority. And the direction proposed is low risk in all but one objective. It's only the econometrics that really is starting to reach out there and challenge the way the EPA thinks. So in hindsight, the process fell into all three possible traps. The outcome felt good at the time, got a good grade, and it felt good because we called it strategy development and planning. We focused on existing capability extension and basic capability development. We chose low-cost extensions because we were cost-constrained, rather than thinking about blue ocean options. So escaping the track, sadly it's somewhat difficult in the public sector. The EPA has a strategic planning group. It's influenced heavily by what the state requires. So it has personnel that form a strategic planning group. They formally present a proposed strategy to the board for approval. That board is appointed by a cost-conscious and risk-averse minister who is in office with a renewable 3-year term, and so is very unlikely to take a great deal of risk. Things we can do to try and improve it is potentially undertake some skunk works where we start to use our influence with universities within South Australia and get real-time monitoring done as part of a CRC, apply for a grant with the government, with a university, and start some of that skunk work type thing of real-time monitoring, thinking about big data, how we can collect that, automatically present it to the public in a meaningful way, streamlining a lot of the work that goes on now, get licensees to present the data in a similar type of way so it can be automatically analyzed without taking large chunks of time of officers, etc., etc. So anyway, that's it. I hope you enjoyed it.